Hello, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Friends. And I'm really happy tonight. I'll say I'm Meredith Porte, and I've been doing this series for quite some time now, the last few months. And I'm just really delighted to get to introduce to you people that I feel and that we at the center, at the Brahma Kumari Center, feel are really making an impact either on the community or the world. Our guest today, well, she would be making an impact on our community, except that she lives in New York City. So, but I'm sure her energy spreads, somehow reaches Miami. So I'm very, very happy to introduce to you Tara Bracco, who has really gotten into something and created something that has had an effect on New York City with a lot of people who are involved with this. And it's called Poetic People Power. As we're going to be hearing about Poetic People Power and what it does and what she's been doing for quite some time. But I first want to just give you a little idea of her impressive work and where she's been featured and what she's done. Tara she's performed on stage throughout New York City for the last 20 years. She's also been featured in Oprah Magazine, Time Out New York, Huffington Post, and I'm very proud to say she received the Images and Voices of Hope Award some years ago for the work that she's doing. Images and Voices of Hope, many of you might know, has merged with the Peace Studio. And Tara is, I see her as just a longtime visionary thinker. So I'm very happy to be here with you, Tara.
Thank you so much for having me.
I was looking at some of the work that you've done and what you've been doing for a long time in New York City, the New York City area. And I thought maybe we would start with you doing one of your poems on the stage. And then we can come back and we can talk about what you do, what you've been doing for 20 years. So let's take a look.
Years before I settled back in New York City, working for Erica Jong, where I learned a woman could be a writer, not only a teacher, where words didn't have to be feminine or nice or pretty, where the pen could decide fearlessly what a woman wanted to say, and once on paper, an amazing new reality. It had been said because I wrote it. But I also learned that writing is not a quality. There would be no room of my own to think clearly, even as I read Woolf, both Virginia and Naomi, but still I typed out stories on computers with cracked screens and broken keyboards from my bed, not even a chair of my own or a desk of my own. And I wondered if cramped spaces led to cramped minds and cramped creativity. Low wages were cramping my style. My style of writing stifled before its voice could take its shape.
Wow, pretty powerful. And this is all part of something that you have been doing. You didn't just start this whole Poetic People Power. You go back 20 years, don't you?
Nearly 20 years, yeah.
From nearly 20 years, that's a long time. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could explain what it is that you're all about and this organization that you founded, and that not just founded, but you've been nurturing and really bringing so many people along on your journey of poetry.
Sure. Thank you again for having me. It's always nice to speak with you, Meredith, and chat. I call it P3 because Poetic People Power can be a mouthful. I was in my late 20s when I started this group, and I really wanted a name that captured the spirit of what we were doing. It started in 2003 as part of the Poets Against the War movement. At that time, they were organizing poets around the country and encouraging poets to create readings in their neighborhoods and have poets speak out against the war as the Iraq War was starting. So I put together a reading downtown at the Activist Bookstore here in New York City called Blue Stockings, and it was called Women's Words About War. And I thought nobody would show up. But we really filled the bookstore, and over 35 people came for a poetry reading in New York when there's so many other things to do. That was a really good turnout. And it occurred to me at that time, the poets and people were asking me to keep organizing events. And it occurred to me at that time that we really needed a project that combined poetry and activism. And I was thinking about how, as a young writer, I didn't really feel like there was a space for me. My voice, writing voice, didn't really fit into the literary world. It didn't really fit into the slam poetry world. And so I thought I could create a space that really welcomed diverse poets, diverse voices, and that it could combine activism on a yearly basis, and that each year we would gather and explore a different political or social theme. So we've been doing that since 2003. Sometimes we didn't do it every year, but we have done at this point 19 shows, and I've commissioned 120 poems by about 40 poets. And a part of this project that I really wanted to make an important piece was to commission and pay emerging poets for their work and encourage them to say yes to writing, even when they didn't have the work already done. And that was very challenging for many people, especially on topics they may not have been familiar with. So we've done shows on topics like global warming, universal health care, time poverty, gentrification, and even the global water crisis.
You've said a lot right there, a lot. So I guess my question is, well, what is it about poetry? I mean, that you feel, and writing poetry, because what you've done is you've really brought out some kind of creativity that people didn't maybe even know that they had, and some kind of very deep feelings. Is that what it is that poetry can do that maybe other forms of writing can't do as quickly?
I think
or intensely?
I think what's interesting about poetry, and particularly spoken word, I like to think of our shows as spoken word shows because they really encourage a range of different poets. Some are performance poets, some are literary poets, some are actors who like to write and are, consider themselves poets as well. But for us, it's really about what can be spoken to a group in a live experience versus read off the page, and have some connection with the audience in that way. And I feel that spoken word poetry can really do this because in a lot of ways, it gives some room for people not just to express and describe what's around them, but also to include some commentary if they choose to about the way they see the world around them. So it made sense to me. And it also made sense to me to do it through poetry because poems, I encourage my poets to keep a 3 to 5 minute time limit. It's really great because I can offer an audience a diversity of talent. And if something doesn't resonate with somebody in the audience, it will be over, and maybe something that the next artist does will really land for them. So it really, from a producer standpoint, it really worked in a lot of ways. And I just think there's so much power in words and communication, and poetry, like other art forms as well, can definitely help with that.
So are you trying to move people when you said social activists?
Yeah.
When I hear the word social activists, I think, a person is really trying to move people to a certain point of view and influence people. So are you who creates these gatherings? And as we said, you've been doing this for many years now. Are you trying to move people and influence people to some sort of action?
It's less about encouraging people to see the world a certain way and more about educating people so they know what's going on in the world. And not all the poems have to be political or advocacy poems. Part of what I do as producer and as the person who writes the script is to help set up that work so that the poet has creative freedom. And people over the years have taken the topic, in a range of creative ways, addressed it in the way that works for them. But we've addressed these issues in many ways before they were mainstream topics. So we did a show about global warming before Al Gore's movie An Inconvenient Truth came out. We did a show about revolution before Occupy Wall Street happened, about 6 months before. We did a show about universal health care before Obama was elected. So the point is, some of these issues were affecting the everyday lives of people. Now we're pretty on board with what it all means for people and how it affects their lives. But back then, some of these things were really issues that people didn't know the layers and the complexities of. So by using poetry, we can bring it to the stage and we can share this information with the community, and we can encourage them to get involved if they want, and let people know what they can do about it if it's something they want to do something about. So every program included a stay active section where there were additional resources for people to get involved.
When did you begin to realize, because you were quite young when you started this and you're still young, but like, when did you realize that you could do something that maybe was a bit out of the box? And it, like, you know, things have been done forever, all kinds of things, but nobody was really doing this at the time. And when did you just realize that you could use a lot of your creativity? And I'm talking about you being a journalist, you being, you know, I mean, so many different things that you have done. An actress too, I think you've acted.
I started out as an actress.
And a poet. I mean, when did you realize that you could maybe use it to move people, is what you're doing, I think.
I think that for me, it was really a learning and listening to the women who come before me. So I worked at a nonprofit theater called the Women's Project and Productions. It's now called WP Theater. And I worked there under the founder, Julia Miles, who created the oldest and largest women's theater in the country. And we had an off-Broadway theater company. So I had the benefit of being around extraordinary women leaders who had vision for what a woman could do. And then I also was involved with the Woodhull Institute for Ethical Leadership, and I was around extraordinary women there. So I think those experiences really helped shape me, thinking that I could do something that hadn't been done yet, and that I could just try and see what happens. And that may not seem remarkable in 2020, but I will say that when I was starting out in the late 90s, the world back then still was very hierarchical, right? Like, you had to get dressed up in a suit to go rent an apartment. Right? Like, there wasn't Facebook, there wasn't social media. You couldn't just get out your voice. There wasn't a blog. So in order to have access to spaces where you could be heard as a young woman, I really felt like I had to create something, and not just for myself, but for other people. Because for me, I really wanted to be in community with other artists.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that word community, because I was watching something on the Peace Studio, and you well know the Peace Studio, and it was some writers. And one of the things that the writer, he was actually a writer for President Obama. He had written most of his speeches, as I understood it. And he said it's very difficult today. I mean, especially, you know, with what we've been through over the last 2 years, to bring people together in community, and that being part of a community can really create change. So is that what you feel that you are doing, that you're actually creating change by just bringing people together in community?
Yeah, I really think so. I think one of the nicest compliments I got over the years is a young woman said to me, she was attending the annual shows and people came to expect them each year. And at one point, when we moved the shows from April to another season, people would call me up and say, wait, there's not a show this year? And this one woman said to me, she said, I think of your shows almost like a holiday. I have my family holidays and then I have P3 every year. And that was just the nicest compliment, because I was able to create something that was sustainable and it became part of people's lives on an annual basis. And that's not just for the poets, that was for the audience too. And really trying to think about, when I put a project together, how can I do it so all these needs are met? What does the audience need? What do the poets need? And so that was all part of the decision-making process over time.
So you really go through a lot to, you know, come up with what you're doing. You don't just sort of slap it together and go, let me get a group of poets. And
no,
it's very well thought out, isn't it? And I get the feeling you are that type of a person. You know, maybe also your journalism background. So what is it you think people are needing right now in terms of maybe, what are you thinking about right now for the future in terms of
Yeah,
creating some of these conversations?
that's a great question. I think it's interesting. I almost think like people right now need more hope, because I think that people really do feel overwhelmed by what's going on in the world. And so we are more connected now in terms of social media. And, but then there's also a disconnection, right? Because people probably haven't seen people in their communities because of the pandemic. And I think what's great about what's comforting about the work that I've done over these years is these years have almost become like mile markers. These shows have become like mile markers for what was happening at a certain time in history for me. So I can actually see that there has been change, and that's been really comforting to me. And there's a lot of work we have to do, but I would say in the last couple of years, the public consciousness on these issues that we've covered over the years has really been raised. And now I think people need a sense of hope that there can actually be some movement in the right direction on these things that they care about.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I also, very much believe in this idea of hope and a feeling that something's being accomplished. But I also
Yeah.
hear, a lot of people, like you say, feeling that, what's going on in the world, that things just seem to be getting worse. And I don't like to dwell on that, but I heard a journalist on TV, on the news the other day, someone who I really respect, and he said something like, I feel it's the end of civilization right now. There's so much bad going on at the end of his segment on the news. And I was very surprised that he said that.
Yeah.
And, but yet, there is this sense of, there's hope and there's a feeling of enthusiasm like you're talking about. And I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
And it's, how do we keep that up and not get caught up in the negativity and the hostility and the way truth is really being distorted? How do we do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say the way that people are feeling now, because for many people, they're really newly awaking to some of these issues, and they're awaking all at once to a range of issues, is kind of the frustration I felt years ago about some of these topics, where I felt like we really need to speak out about this, right? Like people need to know how these issues are affecting people. So I'm somewhat comforted, honestly, by how much people know and how much people are exploring on these issues now. And I do think it's possible to, I feel more positive about it than I did 15 years ago. And part of that too is I think when you show up for your community, or you participate, or you do whatever part you can do, and you think that through, there's a comfort in that too. So, for me, building something new, having the ability to say something that hasn't been said before, being in community, all those are opportunities for me to really have well-being and connect with other people who are good-hearted people. So I think initially when I was starting out, I had this idea that I want to be around artists, and I want to be around people who care about politics, and I want to be around good-hearted, like, nonprofit people. And so I had an intention about who I thought I could connect with. And now, nearly 20 years later, that's my whole world now. Because that's a very natural, what was once aspirational about what my life would look like is now just my life, my reality, because this is my community. So I do think I'm in a more positive place than I've ever been. And I can see how people who possibly are really seeing and being overwhelmed by these issues all at once, who haven't been involved for 20 years on some of these topics, it can be really overwhelming. But then you just connect with the right people and you keep moving forward.
Well, you're making me feel really, really good, because I believe in this, and I know the Brahma Kumaris work towards this as well, as does the Peace Studio. But to see you and to hear how you've done it on your own, in a sense, you've just kept moving forward, and little by little making an impact. And to make an impact on New York City, wow. I mean, that to me is like, amazing, because New York City can be so brutal. and
Yeah.
so fast moving. I wanted to go to another person, one of your speakers, one of your poets. And yes, maybe you could say something about Chanel, right? Chanel,
Yes.
before we go, yeah.
This is a clip of Chanel doing a piece on the word sing for a show that we did in August 2020 called Can You Hear Me Now? We were commissioned by Snug Harbor, which is a cultural center here in New York City and Staten Island, to create a show about women's voices in association with an exhibit they were doing calling Don't Shut Up. So we did a show to explore how women's voices get heard in society. And I conceived the show, and I decided that poets would write poems on certain words. And one of those words was sing. So this is a clip from her poem.
I have to sing till every voice is free to join me, till every woman is seen and heard, till every man can hear no and there be no confusion, till my input in this world is valued, till my worth is no longer limited to my ability to bear a child or sit and smile, till I see reflections of me in every government seat, till my body belongs to me, till every vote is counted, till every machine in every Black county is not broken. So all women are given credit for how they continuously make this world whole. I'm going to sing of hope, create a song for every key to be sung together by every woman, a choir weaving harmonies. We will turn every place we stand into our tabernacle, dreaming that one day each note will come closer to equality, and we will sing like Ida B. Wells, and we will sing like Haley Quinn Brown, and we will sing like Francis Ellis Watkins Harper. We will sing, sing. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall all be free someday.
So great,
There's
right?
something every time I've watched that a few times, and it really just gets to the heart, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I want to say something because I did notice something. Some of the women are maybe more angry. I mean, they're more intense. So, I mean, we're not watching them now because we wanted to see you, and we wanted to see one more person, Chanel. But is that part of the process that women have to maybe kind of cleanse themselves of whatever it is bothering them? Or, I mean, they aren't all like that, but I mean, I felt a sense of anger with some of them.
I think that it's a normal feeling to feel anger over injustice. And a lot of the topics that we deal with, there are many elements of injustice, and to give people a space and a voice for that is important. I think that, I have a poem about art and revolution, and it's really based on something that came out of the Seattle protests in 1999 when there were protests against the World Trade Organization. The intent there was really, one of the organizers talked about having festivals of resistance. And I thought it was so interesting. And I explored that. And I was really saying in this poem that, resistance and protest is not about broken windows or violence, but about festivals with puppetry, children holding hands, and that we can dance in parks and become the conductors who orchestrate our own change. We'll reform our spaces the way somebody makes pottery out of clay. Those are the general ideas. I don't have the whole poem in front of me, but this idea that we're in community, and protest can be happy and can be celebratory. It doesn't just have to look like anger, but very often we see images on the news that don't really reflect the whole scope of what's going on, because they might just show a broken window versus people peaceful protesting. So
that's a very, very important point, Tara. I mean, that really is that perhaps the way we can really have an effect or on society is, again, and I've been involved with organizations that do speak to this, that we have to really begin to look at the images that we're seeing. I mean, there are people, of course, that say they can't even watch the news anymore, they can't even watch television or listen to news because it is so angry. but maybe it has to do with changing, the kinds of things that we see and we hear.
Yeah.
Tell me, I mean, I have a friend and she was like a real news junkie. She's a lawyer, news junkie, watched, her husband said she gets so mad sometimes that she kicked the television. She's so gentle and peaceful. And I would be, what? But she knew a lot about what was going on in the world, and maybe too much. But recently I spoke with her and she goes, you know what? I've sort of turned it off now. I'm watching very little. I'm listening to very little. And she started telling me about things she's watching on Zoom, things to uplift, things to make her feel happy. And somehow she came to that. And so maybe that's what we have. Do people need to be fed more with things that are, as you say, joyful and picnics but creating change all at the same time? I love that idea.
Yeah, one of the last events we did was called Embrace 2021, Reclaim What You Love, Restore How You Feel. I might have confused the words there. I don't have the title in front of me, but we co-produced it with the Ink Project. And it was just a way too to say our emotional well-being is just as important as all these social and political topics that we covered over the years. And I do think that it's worth, people can be angry if it gets them aware and involved. I think one of the first images that really moved me is when I saw footage of the protests in 1999 in Seattle, and it was an image where a cop took off a gas mask and sprayed directly into the face of a sitting protester, peaceful protester. And I thought that is outrageous. That is such an injustice. And that moved me to want to do more activism work. But as I do more activism work, I want to move towards solutions. I don't want to just be angry. I don't want to just be screaming about everything. I want to think about what can be done so that we really do move to a better place. And for me, I'd be happy to not have to do poetry shows in the years to come. I'm not here to just, keep having this work for myself. I want things to be resolved. I want to live in a better world. I hope one day we don't have to be talking about these issues, honestly.
That to me is really empowering. It would be not to have to be talking about them, but to see them. Now, you have made the statement, I was reading, that you have said that you really believe change happens in little steps. And I was just wondering how you feel about that. And I know that David Byrne, with his show on Broadway right now, I don't know if you've seen it. I saw it on television. It was televised and I loved it. I was on the plane. What's it called again? David Byrne's, God, I can't remember the name, but everybody, is hearing about it.
I saw it before the pandemic.
But he talks about, and that's what he's doing. He has some kind of a site where he's talking about showing examples of change happening all over the world, things that are making a difference in a community, people coming together. And that's what his message is it's, change will happen little by little by little. And they're happening. And so I was wondering, is that how you see change too?
Yeah, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg has a great quote about that as well that we used in our woman show. I think part of the ways that we can each be inspired is to learn the stories we don't know. And I think certain people in our society really really rise to the top for who gets featured and what stories get told. So we did a show about environmental heroes who aren't widely known. And it's like, let's shine a spotlight on people in communities doing great work, whether they're shutting down a coal plant or they're addressing environmental racism in their community. Let's let people know these names. And then let's people feel that the person who really creates change looks like themselves, looks like the person in the mirror, and I think that that's an important piece of it. So I hope that answers your question, but
yes,
because there are people across this country doing work in communities that we don't know about. So it's easy to think that they're not there, but they are there, and what they're doing is powerful.
So we should be looking for the really empowering, positive, inspiring stories and focus maybe more on what's happening out there. And those, like you say, those stories are out there. Maybe it's your next door neighbor. You don't know but to really focus on that and kind of hold on to that rather than keep focusing on all the bad things that are happening.
Yeah,
You're just
when you're around
refreshing.
that,
I don't know what to
yeah,
say.
when
It
you're,
feels so great hearing you, you know, and what
yeah,
you've done and how you continue it. I'm going to ask you a question. Um, is it difficult though to, I mean, I'm like amazed at how you're always got another project and another project. So you seem to be able to move from one project to another, and it comes from your experience and also the respect that you must have in the community of New York. Yeah.
yeah. So are you
Well, I
asking
guess,
how
yeah,
it,
my question is a lot of people say, well, I'd like to do that, but you know, it's kind of not an easy thing, right? I think it comes from years of the work that you've done to be able to
yeah,
continue all of this, right? I
yeah.
think.
And I also was very
Yeah.
careful about not overwhelming myself. So in the early years where people said, let's do more of these, I thought I'll do one a year, because it took about 4 months of part-time work on top of my other jobs to,
Hmm.
volunteer and do this work.
Hmm.
So it is a time commitment. I can see, and I wanted to build something that was sustainable. After 20 years, I don't know exactly what P3 will look like, but I know right now we're working on really things that are more archival, like how do we put the work together in a book? We're doing some development work towards a possible documentary and really capturing what did a group of artists in downtown New York do over 2 decades to make change through poetry. And to me, that's the powerful story. It's not my story. It's
Hmm.
the story of all these artists working together and how we're connected, and then what everybody goes off and does in their own lives.
We have to all feel part of something, know that we're part of something much bigger. It's not
Yeah.
just about us doing something. And I think you got that a long time ago, and that's why you've had so much success. And I did want to say also that you work as a journalist, so you do have different jobs that you're doing.
Yeah.
And I know you work for an environmental site, right, focusing on the environmental problems. And so you've been in demand too, in terms of the work that, I guess you could say, the work that pays the bills, right?
Mhm.
Because you can't always depend upon things like this, but you've kept this up for so long, and as you were saying, that you have really uh, built up, a whole support system and people that are behind you and really have been helped by you, whether it's the audience or the poets or or anybody else. So it's just a pleasure to get to see you and interview you.
Thank
And I
you.
know that I'll be following you to see what more you do next, because I know it'll get better and better, and you will make an impact, continue to make the impact that you've made. Thank you
Thanks so
so
much.
much. Thank you. Good to see you.
So great to talk to you, Meredith.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back soon.